Now, and I call on Joe Fitzpatrick to move motion number 624.
Formally moved.
Thank you. No member has asked to speak against the motion. I will therefore put the question to the Chamber. The question is that motion 624 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are all agreed. Now, the next item of business is a statement by the First Minister on the EU referendum. And before I call the First Minister, may I just say a few words. This is the first opportunity we have had to come together since the monumental events of last week. The consequences of the EU referendum for Scotland are clearly complex and will take some time to fully emerge. I am determined that the Parliament is able to play a full role in this process, that we are able to be a voice and able to provide a platform for every voice in this debate and to scrutinise the reactions of the Government in this matter. I am determined that the Parliament is able to respond to events as they develop, and I have therefore instructed the parliamentary authorities to ensure that resources are available over the summer recess, if necessary, to support a recall of Parliament should I deem it necessary. I will remain in close contact with the party leaders and with the business managers to discuss this matter and to report back to Parliament regularly on progress. Thank you. And I call on the First Minister. First Minister.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This is not a statement I wanted to make. The Scottish Government didn't seek a referendum on our membership of the European Union, and we certainly did not want this result. While, of course, I respect the views of all those who voted, the UK result leaves me deeply disappointed and profoundly concerned. The Scottish Government continues to believe that membership of the European Union is in the best interests of Scotland, for our economy, our society, our culture and our place in the world. And not just for Scotland, but also for the rest of the UK. That is why, with the great majority of members of this Parliament and with all of the party leaders, I campaigned hard for a Remain result. I am proud that Scotland voted to remain within the European Union and that we did so emphatically. It is, of course, important for all of us to recognise that some in Scotland did not vote to remain, but instead to leave the European Union. And I want to make it clear that as we move forward, I am committed to listening, to understanding and seeking to address the concerns that they have. However, more than 60% of voters across Scotland and a majority in every single one of our 32 local authority areas said clearly that they wanted Scotland to stay in the EU. Scotland voted to stay inside the single market and to protect the jobs, investment and trade that depend on it. We chose to be an open, inclusive and outward-looking society where other EU citizens are welcome to live, work and contribute. We voted to protect the freedom and prosperity that comes with our rights to travel, live, work and study in other European countries. And we endorsed the principle of independent countries working together to tackle global issues like climate change, energy security and the fight against terrorism. Scotland spoke clearly for Remain, and I am determined that Scotland's voice will be heard. We are now, of course, in uncharted territory. We face risk and uncertainty greater perhaps than at any time in the post-war period. We are already seeing some of the early consequences. There has been extraordinary volatility in equity and currency markets, and beyond the financial markets, there are suggestions that companies are considering relocating jobs and diverting investment, and that others are concerned about their future access to skilled workers. The Chancellor emerged yesterday, I won't say from hiding, though it was beginning to feel like that, to tell us that the UK economy faces the future from a position of strength. Just hours later, the pound reached a 31-year low and the Standards & Poor's Ratings Agency downgraded the UK's AAA credit rating. Now, like all of us, I hope very much that we will see an early return of stability and some confidence. However, I do fear that we are still in the early days of this period of risk and uncertainty. Presiding Officer, these are times that call for principles, purpose and clarity, in short, for leadership. That is why the vacuum that has developed at Westminster is so unacceptable. Politicians who propose this referendum, no matter how bruised they feel by the result, have a duty now to step up to deal with the consequences of its outcome. And those who campaign for a leave vote, making a number of promises in the process, must now be clear and honest about their plans to deliver. One thing I think is clear: there cannot be 3 months of drift now, while both the Government and main opposition parties at Westminster immerse themselves in eternal elections. That would compound the difficult situation we are already facing and risk even more damage to our economy. We have heard that, almost incredibly, there was no plan for this outcome. It is my view that the UK Government must now get a grip on this. First, to restore stability and confidence, then to set out its plan for the way forward, and it must involve the Scottish Government in that work at every step of the way. The Scottish Government is already hard at it. I have set 3 priorities for our work in the immediate term. First, I want to reassure those from other countries who have chosen to make Scotland their home. I made a commitment to them on the morning of the result, and I want to repeat it here today. You are welcome in Scotland. This is your home, and we value your contribution. This commitment is all the more important in light of reported racist attacks in the wake of last week's result. Let us, as a Parliament, unite today to make clear that Scotland is an open and welcoming country, and that prejudice, hate and racism will not be tolerated now or at any time. The terms of the motion we debate this afternoon afford this whole chamber the chance to send that message loudly and clearly. As Alistair Allen, the Minister for Europe, stressed our commitment to EU citizens living in Scotland when he briefed the Consular Corps earlier this week, and over the course of next week I will host Consuls General from all EU Member States at a summit in Butte House to discuss how we provide further reassurance in the weeks and months ahead. The Deputy First Minister is also taking steps to reassure EU students already studying in or due to come to Scotland of their continued place in our academic community, and I welcome the commitment from Aberdeen University to guarantee the tuition of EU students for the duration of their course, whatever the UK does. Presiding Officer, our second priority has been to engage with businesses, with organisations and with stakeholders to provide as much clarity as we possibly can, and to understand the concerns and perspectives of all those affected by this period of damaging uncertainty. We have made clear in those discussions that Scotland remains a stable and attractive place for business and investment. Our ability to trade with EU countries continues unaffected by the result of the referendum until the UK concludes any negotiations, and it is my intention that we will secure continued access to the single market for Scotland. I summoned a resilience meeting within a few hours of the result being confirmed to review with ministerial colleagues the early impacts and the Scottish Government's plans and actions in response. The following morning, Saturday, I chaired a special meeting of the Scottish Cabinet. My colleagues reported on their immediate engagement across different sectors and communities in Scotland. That engagement continues to inform our planning and our response. Scotland is a good place to do business. Let us be clear about that. But let us also be clear about this. If in the circumstances the UK is now in, Scotland does find a way to maintain our relationship with the EU, as I am determined we will, then Scotland will become an even more attractive place to do business, and I want to ensure that we are alert to those opportunities. Presiding Officer, this Government, and indeed I hope this Parliament, will not look in on ourselves. We listen and we will lead. That is what people expect of us, and it is what we must continue to do. Let me turn now to our third and overriding priority. Through all of this, I am determined, utterly determined, to protect Scotland's relationship with and our place in the European Union. The formal process of the UK leaving the EU does not start until the Prime Minister notifies the European Council in terms of Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty of an intention to withdraw. As the Prime Minister made clear on Friday morning, he does not intend to make that notification. It will be a matter for his successor. That means we are not yet at the stage of formal negotiations. It is vital, however, that we seize the chance we have before these negotiations start to ensure that Scotland's voice is heard as widely as possible in London, in Brussels and by Member States across Europe. The Prime Minister gave me a commitment on Friday morning to the full engagement of the Scottish Government and to ensure that the interests of all parts of the UK are protected and advanced. Today I seek the Parliament's authority to hold the Prime Minister and his successor to that commitment. This week I have discussed the situation with the President of the Republic of Ireland, who will address this chamber tomorrow. I also had a very constructive discussion earlier this morning with the Taoiseach. As the Chamber would expect, I am closely in touch with the heads of other administrations in these islands, including through the British Irish Council, which met in Glasgow just before the referendum and which I expect may meet again very shortly. I spoke on Friday with the Mayor of London and this morning with the Chief Minister of Gibraltar to discuss the shared interest we now have in protecting our relationship with Europe. The Government is directly in touch with the governments of other Member States, both to repeat our assurance that their citizens are welcome in Scotland and to make clear Scotland's strong commitment to our relationship with Europe. We are also in touch with both the European Commission and the European Parliament in Brussels, responding to messages of encouragement and support for the work ahead of us. In these contacts, we have again emphasised the overwhelming support in Scotland for staying in the European Union and the commitment of the Scottish Government to protecting our relationship with Europe. These contacts are, of course, just the start. Tomorrow I will make an initial visit to Brussels to set out Scotland's position and interest to representatives of the major groups in the European Parliament and to the President of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz. I expect to hear from the Prime Minister on the outcome of the European Council taking place this week, and following that I intend to set out Scotland's position directly to the European Commission. We are also following up our first contacts with other Member States. The Cabinet Secretary for Culture, Europe and External Affairs yesterday met the ambassadors of Slovakia, Germany and France to share our response to the result and our determination to protect Scotland's relationship with Europe. Presiding Officer, I believe we have made a good start. Our early priority has been to ensure that there is a widespread awareness across Europe of Scotland's different choice in the referendum and of our aspiration to stay in the European Union. We will intensify this work in the days and the weeks that lie ahead. It is my responsibility to ensure that Scotland's voice is heard in Europe, and I intend to do so. I have also been very clear that I want our work to be guided at every step of the way by expert advice and by wide experience. We have got a great deal of work to do, both in government and indeed as a parliament, to set out and evaluate all the impacts of the referendum result and all of the options open to Scotland to secure our relationship with the European Union. For that reason, I am establishing a standing council of experts to provide advice to me and to my government on how best to achieve our EU objectives. This council will be made up of specialists in finance, economics, European and diplomatic matters, and it will encompass a range of political and constitutional opinions. It will provide the government with access to a wealth of knowledge built up over years of experience. The Council will consider the impact of proposed changes to the UK's relationship with the EU on Scottish interests and advise Scottish ministers throughout our negotiations on the best way to secure Scottish interests and objectives. Membership of the Council will be flexible to ensure that we have access to appropriate advice as and when it is required. However, I can advise Parliament today that it will be chaired by Professor Anton Muscatelli, Principal of Glasgow University, and include amongst its members Professor Sir David Edward, former Judge of the European Court of Justice, Dame Marriott Leslie, former UK Ambassador to NATO, Lord John Kerr, formerly Head of the Diplomatic Service at the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, John Kay, one of the country's leading economists, Anne Glover, former Chief Scientific Advisor to the President of the European Commission, Charles Grant, Director of the Centre for European Reform, David Martin, the Labour Member of the European Parliament, and Graham Smith, General Secretary of the STUC. I intend to publish the full list of initial members later today. Presiding Officer, I have set out for Parliament the action we have taken so far since the result of the referendum became clear. The motion we shall debate shortly invites the Parliament to give me and my government a mandate to continue this work and to explore every option for retaining Scotland's relationship with the European Union. I very much hope that it will attract support across this chamber. The motion before us calls on the Government to report back to Parliament and to the European Committee, and we will do so. I will also keep party leaders informed of our progress and ask the Cabinet Secretary for Europe to keep her counterparts fully informed over the parliamentary recess. I assure the Chamber that we will return to Parliament to seek approval of any outcome to these discussions. I also believe that there is a role for key committees of the Scottish Parliament to contribute to this vital process, and I will be very happy to discuss that with the European Committee at the earliest opportunity. Presiding Officer, let me turn now finally to the matter of independence. I want to be clear to Parliament that while I believe that independence is the best option for Scotland, I don't think that will come as a surprise to anyone. It is not my starting point in these discussions. My starting point is to protect Scotland's interests and to protect our relationship with the EU. However, I am in no doubt that there has been a very real and material change to Scotland's circumstances brought about by last week's referendum result. There is no doubt that we are in a new and different place this week from last. During the independence referendum, we were told that staying in the UK meant we could benefit from having guaranteed access to the EU. Indeed, that was a driving factor in many people's votes. That is no longer true. The country and the constitutional settlement the people of Scotland voted for in 2014 is no longer a reality. Based on the very clear result in Scotland, if we were to be removed from the EU, it would be against the will of our people. That would be democratically unacceptable. It is for that reason that I have said that everything must be on the table to protect our place in Europe, including a second independence referendum, and to ensure that the option of holding a referendum within the timeframe of UK negotiations on leaving the EU is viable. We will prepare the legislation now. However, let me be clear about this. If the Government does conclude that the best or the only way to protect Scotland's place in the EU is through a referendum on independence, we will return to Parliament with that judgment, and it will then, at that time, be for Parliament to decide. I am emphatically not asking Parliament to endorse that step today. A vote for this motion is not a vote for a referendum on independence. I hope that this clear commitment will remove any reason for the Conservatives not to back our motion today. It would be ironic and I think deeply regrettable if the party that has put us into this unfortunate position ended up as the only one standing in the way of our efforts to resolve it. Voting to deny us the Parliament's support for our discussions with EU institutions and Member States to explore ways of delivering the outcome people voted for would, I think, be to frustrate Scotland's interests. Presiding Officer, the situation we find ourselves in is not of our making. There is no easy path ahead, and at this stage there are no guaranteed outcomes. But my job is to navigate the best possible path for Scotland, one that protects our interests and gives effect to what the people of our country voted for, and that is what I am determined to do. As I do so, I promise that I will be open and frank with Parliament and with the Scottish people about the options, the challenges and the opportunities that we face, and I hope that we can move forward in a spirit of unity and national purpose. Presiding Officer, my final point today is this. While our agenda on Europe is vital, we will not, must not, allow it to distract us from the business of governing Scotland and delivering on the priorities I set out only a month ago. Later today, the Deputy First Minister will underline our determination to promote excellence and equity in our education system by publishing our new education delivery plan. We will not waver in our determination to reduce inequalities, promote an inclusive and growing economy and reform our public services. The situation we face will not stop us seeking to make Scotland a better country for all the people who live and work here. Indeed, the steps that we take to protect our place in the European Union will be part of that work. Presiding Officer, to conclude, I am asking Parliament to recognise today the position that Scotland has been placed in by the referendum result, a position which is at odds with the will of the Scottish people. And I am asking Parliament to support the motion we bring forward today. Scotland has voted to remain in Europe, and we must now take all the action necessary to ensure that the will of the Scottish people is respected. So I am asking the Chamber today to support the Government in the challenge that lies ahead of us, and for all of us to work together and to do our best to turn this moment of disappointment and regret into a new and promising beginning, based on our common values and our shared commitment to the people we serve.
I thank the First Minister for her statement. Rather than take questions, we're now going to move to a full debate on the European referendum. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary for Culture to move the motion in the name of the First Minister?
Formally moved.
And can I ask members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons first? Can I also suggest that we allow the opening speakers for each party not to be interrupted or any interventions for the opening speakers only? I call on Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, I thank the First Minister for advance notice of her statement. Too often, political events are described as seismic or earth-shattering, when in truth, the tremors are more for politicians than working people. Last week's referendum was not one of them. It is a defining moment in our country's story. It is deeply significant for all of us. I find myself reflecting that this time just 7 days ago I was in final preparations for the BBC debate, arguing in favour of the European Union, where I was told that we were overplaying the impact of Brexit. Well, a week is indeed a long time in politics, and it turns out, after all, that major constitutional decisions, like on the EU or on Scottish independence, do indeed have major economic consequences. So last week's decision was not the one that I supported. It was not the one that I campaigned for, and I am deeply disappointed by the result. But the first message that I want to send today is that my belief in our capacity to meet the challenges that we face as Scots and as members of the United Kingdom has not diminished 1 inch. And those challenges are great indeed. They are complex. There are questions upon questions, with more that have not yet been formulated, never mind answered. But we are a nation with a fundamentally strong economy, an educated workforce, a developed diplomatic network, and a capacity to overcome those challenges we face. Of that, I am certain. Presiding Officer, we are seeking to amend the Government's motion today, but let me begin by setting out where we wish to support it. First and foremost, let us unite in this Parliament in saying to people from across the European Union, you are welcome, you are wanted, your contribution is recognised, and this is your home. Too often I fear the referendum debate was guilty of discussing the contribution of EU migrants to this country as some sort of necessary evil to fill in the gaps in our labour market. So let us say it loud and let us say it clear, that we don't just need your labour, we want your values, your brains, your culture, and we want you. And let us also unite in expressing our disgust at the racist insults and attacks that EU citizens have faced in the days since the referendum. It is shaming to our country, and it is not in our name. Second, the Scottish Conservatives today wish to pledge our support for the Scottish Government's full engagement with the UK Government and other devolved administrations in the coming weeks and months as Britain's renegotiations are taken forward. It cannot be overstated how important this new settlement will be for all of us. It will define our new relationship with the European Union for coming generations. It is vital that we get it right. And it is vital that all the voices are heard in putting that deal together. I want the First Minister of Scotland involved. I want the First Ministers of Wales and Northern Ireland involved. And having stood alongside him last week and seen him take on my Conservative colleagues and argue for his city, I can absolutely say that I want the Mayor of London at the table too. I am pleased that the Prime Minister has repeatedly made it clear that he wants the devolved administrations integrally involved. This is the correct way to progress. And even though the vote was to leave the EU, our motion makes it clear that we want to protect and maximise Scotland's place in Europe, the continent, and in the European single market. I'm not going to try and pretend today that this will be easy. My scepticism is on record. But we all now have a duty to those many people whose jobs rely on trade with EU member states to put our scepticism to one side and to push for the best possible deal. In so doing, we need to ask ourselves some practical questions. Do we want Scotland to remain subject to EU law? Do we want powers over issues such as farming, fishing and the environment held at Brussels or devolved to this chamber? How do we protect the passporting rights of Scotland's financial services industry? These are just some of the practical tasks that will lie ahead in the short and medium term. But in saying that, I do not try today to brush aside the more fundamental consequences of last week's result, consequences which, for those of us here in Scotland, have a wider and deeper significance. As our amendment makes clear, Scotland and Northern Ireland are to leave the European Union even though a majority did not want it. And in response, the First Minister has made it clear in the days since the vote that she wants to explore what options are available to Scotland. And again, let me say where we agree with the First Minister. We welcome the formation of a standing council of experts on this issue. We are indeed in unprecedented territory, so the more expertise we have on this, the better. If the Scottish Government wants to explore Scotland's options from within the United Kingdom, then we can support her in that. However, it is after this stage that we have concerns with the Scottish Government's approach in the days since the result. I cannot ignore the fact that within hours of the vote becoming clear on Friday morning, the Scottish Government had pushed questions of independence front and centre. I cannot ignore the First Minister's Dover House announcement that she'd already instructed government officials to start drawing up the necessary legislation for a second referendum on independence. Nor can I ignore it when I hear the First Minister justifying this on the basis that the UK as constituted in 2013, quote-unquote, no longer exists. And I cannot ignore the SNP Westminster leader telling the House of Commons that in order to remain a European country, an independence referendum may have to happen. Now, I have heard the First Minister telling us here that this motion today is nothing to do with independence, and yet in the days since the result last week it feels to many people across Scotland that the SNP is talking about nothing but independence and has done so again today. The First Minister speaks of people in Scotland who are worried and outraged at the EU result. And I feel duty-bound today also to speak up for the many people of Scotland who have contacted myself and my colleagues in the last few days to say that they too are worried, deeply worried, about the prospect of another referendum on independence. And that is why we have included our opposition to this prospect in our amendment today. You do not dampen the shockwaves caused by one referendum by lighting the fuse for another, nor by saying that the economic impact of leaving one union means you should sever ties with a greater union whose value in trade eclipses the former many times over. So my view is this. The arguments in favour of the UK in 2014 were not just based on the economic risk of independence, as convincing as they were. It was also because I believed that we in Britain had more in common than that which divides us. Does last week's vote test that notion? Yes, it does. And there is little point in pretending otherwise. It tests it, but it does not break it. It does not break the continuing logic of our sharing power with the United Kingdom, not splitting from it. It does not break the arguments in favour of our own single market, a market which is more important to Scotland's prosperity than the EU, not less. It does not break our shared story, which, despite the shockwaves of the last few days, will endure. And the referendum result last week does not overturn the vote we had a mere 21 months ago to remain part of a United Kingdom. I know many people who are hurt by last week's result, including some who voted no in 2014. I am one of them. But the lesson of last week's referendum are not a simple them and us, not when 1 million of our countrymen voted to leave too. The lessons are far more profound. Do we have more in common across the UK than that which divides us? Yes, we have way too much in common. We all have people who feel disempowered and voiceless, anger at the way power has been abused in politics and finance and the media, a frustration at a lack of access and of barriers to social mobility, and a growing sense of insecurity among families who feel that the world is passing them by. These are the questions we must face up to as a country as we reflect on this debate, and they affect all of us, no matter which part of the United Kingdom we're from. And these are the questions we should be answering, not repeating the same old arguments of the past. Presiding Officer, I think we can all now agree that referendums are bruising, and not just bruising, but on matters of such significance, they are wounding too. But from now on, I hope we still find time to learn the right lessons, not the wrong ones, to emerge as a stronger society, a better nation, and a still united kingdom. I move the amendment in my name.
I call Kezia Dugdale.
Presiding Officer, we live in uncertain times. The social, political and economic order has been turned upside down. It will take many months and years for us to fully grasp the consequences. But we've already seen the collapse in the pound, the fall in the value of companies, businesses uncertain about future investment. Those whose jobs rely on our access to the EU single market worry what the future holds. Let me echo what others have said in their message to EU migrants living and working in Scotland. They contribute not just to our economy, but to the society and the culture that we've built together. So let me say to the 180,000 EU migrants that live in Scotland, on behalf of these benches, you are welcome. "20% of them live here in Edinburgh, a city that I have the great honour of representing in this Parliament. 74% here voted to remain, one of the highest results in the whole of the United Kingdom. But I know that there are people in this great city that, despite the support from their neighbours, now feel ill at ease. People who have built their lives here now feel unsettled and anxious. So whilst we fight for their rights and against a rise in racism, we must also continue to show them love and understanding. We must also understand, however, that there were 1 million Scots who voted to leave the European Union. The Leave campaign contained some of the worst dog whistle, racism and xenophobia I have heard in my life. Dog whistles that turned to foghorns whenever Nigel Farage spoke or unveiled a poster. But that does not make every Leave voter a xenophobe or a right-winger. There are working-class communities here in Edinburgh and in Glasgow, just as there are in Sunderland and Sheffield, who feel powerless and are angry at the establishment. I was at the Glasgow count. I saw boxes in the First Minister's own constituency split 50-50. Here in Edinburgh, in the seat that I sought to represent, the poorest communities in Niddrie wanted out, as they did in Sighthill and elsewhere in the city. This result, even in Scotland, is not as straightforward as some have sought to pretend. And all of us in this chamber have a duty to better understand that and to listen and to act upon what we hear. But we didn't vote in communities, constituency, towns, or even as nations. We voted as one country, the United Kingdom, a country that we as Scots reaffirmed our commitment to just 18 months ago. Millions of Scots want to be part of both unions, and that's why it's so important that we give the First Minister our support to do everything she can to secure Scotland's place in the European Union. So the Labour Party will support the government's efforts to do the best it can to mitigate the worst of Brexit, but to strengthen also Scotland's ties with our European neighbours and allies. The priority must be securing jobs and the rights of workers. And all options for protecting Scotland's place in the single market must be explored, including a federalised United Kingdom, which could see those nations of the UK who voted to remain retain their membership or achieve associated status. The Labour Party stands ready to offer assistance where we can to the government, but that support is not unconditional. This Parliament will soon go into recess and not return for 2 months. It used to be said a week was a long time in politics. A day in British politics just now feels like a lifetime. And in that context, 2 months is an eternity, and a recall of Parliament cannot be ruled out. So the First Minister may leave this chamber with the faith of these benches to speak to Europe in the best interest of securing Scotland's future in both the EU and the UK. But that faith can only be maintained by regular communication, involvement and briefings from government to opposition parties. A faith maintained by a continued understanding that as First Minister, she travels to Europe with a duty to represent Scots that voted both yes and no, Scots that voted both remain and leave. But that faith would be betrayed if at any point the First Minister tries to present our support for this motion as support for a second independence referendum. And on that basis, we cannot support the Tory amendment because it removes support for the government to speak to EU institutions and member states regarding Scotland's future. The last line of the Tory motion also says this: believes that the challenges of leaving the EU are not addressed by leaving the UK, Scotland's own union of nations, biggest market and closest friends. So let me warn Ruth Davidson that she had better not dare to suggest that Labour's failure to back her motion is somehow a failure to back the United Kingdom. And I struggle to put into words the anger I feel towards her party at the moment. An anger that's been building since David Cameron announced English votes for English laws within minutes of the Scottish independence referendum result. An anger that grew when her party set Scottish voters against English voters in a hugely divisive and disingenuous 2015 campaign. Anger at a party that forced this EU referendum on a country that did not want it, only to resolve an equal contest in the Tory party. And a Tory campaign in last month's election that told the nation that all that mattered was whether you were a unionist or a nationalist. A campaign that had no vision whatsoever for Scotland and boiled down to just two key messages. One, you can only trust the Tories to protect the Union. Well, how is that going now, Ruth? And two, that the Tories would offer a strong opposition. And all that they stand opposed to today is giving the First Minister some support to speak to EU institutions about our future. The Tories have put the future of the United Kingdom in danger at every turn, and it's high time they shouldered responsibility for that. Presiding Officer, the priority of these benches is to focus on jobs and the economy and make the best of a very bad situation, and we will support the Government tonight to do just that.
I call Patrick Harvie.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer, for the opportunity to contribute to a debate which, like others, I wish we weren't having to have. I'd like to thank the First Minister for the advanced copy of her statement and agree with the substance of it, and I appreciate the tone in which it was made. Can I also thank my own colleagues in the Scottish Green Party who went out and campaigned. They were tired. They'd put their energy, like all of our party activists and campaigners, their energy, their time and their money into an election campaign for our national elections just weeks previously. But they went out and they campaigned, and along with colleagues across the political spectrum, they secured a strong democratic mandate from the people of Scotland. We are European and we're staying European. I want to endorse the First Minister's comments about immigration in particular, and the respect for migrants who've come here, who've chosen to be part of our society, whether from the EU or from other parts of the world, who are feeling excluded, feeling divided from our society as we speak. As Annie Pius, a German citizen who spoke at a rally outside Parliament just an hour ago, made clear, the feeling of isolation many people have been forced to endure over the recent weeks and months are unacceptable. There is a legitimate anger at the years of political and media pandering to racism and xenophobia which has taken place in this country, and those who are responsible for that, those in politics and in the media who have taken part in that, bear a heavy responsibility for the scenes that we have now seen, the far-right and racist tendencies which have been cultivated during this campaign and given disturbing expression since the result must be opposed. The failure of the political mainstream, and I think Kezia Dugdale had a very sound point on this point, the failure of the political mainstream to build an economy which works for the common good has left huge numbers of people feeling angry and alienated. Those feelings are justified, but the Brexit debate has channelled them into the politics of division and hatred, both at home, and risks giving momentum to far-right and anti-European movements elsewhere across Europe. Now, the Leave campaigns, both of them, were of course guilty of far more explicitly cultivating this reaction. But even the Remain side, in my view, failed significantly to give a robust challenge to the notion that people's right to free movement is somehow a burden. In truth, it is a principle of huge importance, and it's one which the Greens will continue to defend. We will certainly be supporting the Government's motion tonight, and I want to make it clear that we will continue to advocate for the clear mandate that's been given by the people of Scotland, as advocated also by many of our European colleagues in a number of different political parties. And I'd like to thank those in the European Greens today who've helped to soften the language around an immediate triggering of Article 50, which would give no time for the serious consideration that is necessary or for the contribution that the Scottish Government is expected to make on all our behalf to the negotiation process. That process must be allowed time. All options as well must remain on the table for achieving that. This is clearly a unique situation that we're facing. Our path toward EU membership, if it takes place, will also be unique compared with any other path to EU membership that a country has taken. And it may be that after exploring all options, far more people than voted yes in 2014 may conclude that independence is the only way to achieve it. We also have to contrast the clear assertion of Scotland's mandate with the utter chaos we see in the Leave camp and the fundamental dishonesty in their campaign. How many times were we told that their campaign was intended to take back control? Take back control of borders, take back control of money, however spurious their figures were about money. And now they're all claiming we can stay in the single market. Well, there is no such thing as a single market if you don't have free movement of labour. It's a fundamental aspect of the free market. And it's also abundantly clear that access to that free market, to that single market, will also include a financial contribution if it can even be negotiated. So this fundamental dishonesty of their claim that we can have the best of both worlds, taking only what we want and giving nothing back to a community of nations across Europe, is something that needs to be challenged. I'm not in any surprise that we've had shameless dishonesty, racism and self-interest from the likes of Boris Johnson, UKIP or from the right-wing media. We cannot allow that kind of rhetoric and that kind of language to become part of the Scottish political landscape. I'd like to remind the Chamber of something that Ruth Davidson once said when we were debating a different constitutional transition, not so very long ago. She said those who are proposing transition must have the trust of the people to safeguard national security, to safeguard the nation-state's economic security, and to safeguard the nation-state's political security by establishing its place in the world through membership of international organisations such as the European Union. Well, how's that going right now? I think the UK Government has demonstrated an historic failure on all three counts, a historic failure across the people of this country, Scotland, and to the wider United Kingdom. Ruth Davidson also argues that the 2014 result must be respected just as much as this year's referendum result. But the 2014 result is now fundamentally superseded. I would remind the Chamber of a comment from the Better Together campaign, the words of the Better Together campaign on just the 2nd of September 2014, just weeks before that referendum. What is the process for removing our EU citizenship? They asked. Voting yes. People who voted in 2014 did so on a false prospectus, a false promise that their membership of the European Union would be protected in those circumstances, and it has not been. I've personally spoken to people, strangers and friends across the political spectrum, and yes, I even do have friends who vote Tory, who have told me that they are ready to re-evaluate the no vote that they cast in 2014, and no one has the right to close that position down for people in Scotland. Presiding Officer, Greens will continue to respect the mandate of voters in Scotland, given so clearly. It must ensure that all options remain on the table, and on that basis we will certainly support the actions the First Minister has set out in preparing the ground for a further independence referendum, should it prove necessary and should it be the will of the people of Scotland. We will certainly support the right of the Scottish Government to enter into the negotiations, while respecting the need for them to return and secure a parliamentary majority here at every step of the way. We will certainly continue to express respect for the people who have moved to Scotland and contribute to our society, and continue to advocate that in whatever solution Scotland and the rest of the UK sees forward, free movement of people remains a fundamental principle. And we will advocate for the human rights, the social protection, the equality, the strong environmental protection, the achievements hard-won, which the European Union has helped to achieve, which are worth defending and which are so directly under threat by the decision so recklessly taken a week ago.
I call Willie Rennie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I've lost elections. I took my loss in Dunfermline in 2010 very hard and very personally. But no election defeat has made me feel like I felt in the early hours of last Friday. It was a deep sense of loss of part of my soul and what I believe to be the soul of this country. Outward-looking, compassionate, tolerant, open, generous. These are the attributes I associate with my country. A country that does not walk on the other side of the road. But that is exactly what our country did last Thursday. And there are the practical benefits too. Tackling crime with the European arrest warrant, that's gone. Cooperation on climate change, gone. A single market, gone. Improved social conditions, gone. All of these and so many others are just gone. We are already seeing the effect on the value of the pound, company shares and credit ratings. I am angry that we have been recklessly led down this path. Angry that prices in shops will rise because of the higher cost of imports. That people's savings are falling in value. That job losses are on the cards. Yet it is not Boris Johnson who will suffer. Michael Gove may lose some money, but he has stacks more to get him by. And Nigel Farage, he simply does not care. It is ordinary people on low and modest incomes who will lose. These are the victims of this crisis. And I hope David Cameron is feeling guilty. He should feel guilty for imposing the divisions of his party on the country. And that responsibility applies to every single Conservative in this Parliament, including Ruth Davidson. The economic chaos means the Tories can never again claim to be the defenders of the economy. And after the surge in the support for independence at the weekend, nor can the Tories claim to be the defenders of the Union. They sparked this economic and constitutional crisis. Ruth Davidson is not defending the Union, she is undermining it, and no Tory amendment today can hide that truth. With every election loss, I have lived to fight another day. I am here today because I got off my knees to fight and win again. The United Kingdom's place in Europe will live to fight another day, and I am determined to fight for it. My party will contest the next general election on a clear platform of supporting the United Kingdom's place in Europe. 7,000 new members have joined our party to campaign with us to win that case. I want Scotland in the United Kingdom and the United Kingdom in Europe. That is the best possible option. I will not settle for anything less. We do need to understand, however, why 1 million people in Scotland voted to leave the European Union. It is of little surprise that if you have a minimum wage job, a 0-hours contract with a damp house and a car that has failed its MOT, you might think you've got nothing to lose. And you probably would not believe a well-heeled Conservative Prime Minister who tells you that the status quo is best for you. But the European Union was not responsible for all those problems. But the Leavers provided that easy target, and David Cameron and Jeremy Corbyn were incapable of making a compelling case for the European Union. The First Minister knows that I oppose another independence referendum. I made that commitment during the election only last month. Today's motion does not endorse independence. The First Minister has made that clear. And in additional words, beyond her statement that was provided to us earlier, she said that was emphatically so. I welcome that. I think that is a welcome remark. I welcome the First Minister also reaching out to other parties to engage in the negotiation process. I immediately agreed on Friday to participate as long as it was not a cunning plan to deliver independence. I want to explore options, whether it's the bizarrely named Reverse Greenland, working with London, Northern Ireland, Gibraltar, or some other arrangement. But we need to fully understand before we move ahead. And rushing headlong to independence will undermine those efforts. There is so much we simply do not know. Making decisions we do not know should be one of the lessons from last week. In my constituency of North East Fife, I have many thriving businesses. They are thriving, in part, through the hard graft of workers from across the continent, as well as those closer to home, working together in harmony. Fisher's Laundry Services, Kettle Produce, many farms, the hotels and restaurants in St Andrews and beyond. They work hard. They make those businesses successful. They have married here, settled here, pay their taxes here. They are one of us, and they will never stop being one of us. I know many who will be offended by the decision last week, but I want them to know that we are standing with them today. We are determined to recapture the soul of this country, so is once again outward-looking, compassionate, tolerant, open and generous. Thank you.